Hello, friends. Welcome to .org, the podcast all about how nonprofits tell their stories. I'm your host, Matt Pearl. I was a broadcast journalist, a TV news reporter locally and nationally for 20 years. Now I run Pearl Impact Media. I help nonprofits and purpose-driven businesses raise money, raise awareness, and distinguish themselves from the rest through meaningful, memorable, and affordable video storytelling. That is my mission, and an offshoot of that mission is this podcast. Each episode, I chat with a nonprofit leader with a defined, thoughtful, and successful approach to telling their organization's story. So I mentioned I used to be a news reporter. In fact, I was a news reporter this time 1 year ago, working for the person who is my guest today. Back then, we worked for a for-profit news company. Now, my guest for this episode 6 of the .org podcast runs a not-for-profit news organization, boldly taking on documentary storytelling from a nonprofit model. Not only has he overseen masterful long-form projects throughout his career, but in this role, he also oversees how he tells the story of his own organization. He is the founder and executive director of Evident Media, Zach Toombs. Welcome to .org.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Zach, great to see you. Question number one, it's always the toughest. Tell us about Evident in 30 seconds or less.
Evident Media is a nonprofit news organization that produces in-depth video and documentary journalism. We connect audiences on these social media platforms where video dominates with original reporting and in-depth video journalism. That's our mission.
Outstanding. And it's a relatively new organization. You announced the launch of Evident all of 4 months ago. It was 4 months before that when you ended your time as director of long form at Scripps News. Take me through the short version of when you decided on this concept, how you decided on it, and how quickly you had to move to make it all happen and get it going in what seems like a short amount of time.
Yeah, it does feel like a long time ago that you and I were colleagues at our previous employer, but it really wasn't that long ago. And things have moved quickly in setting up this new organization. We moved quickly because when we left our last company, we saw this incredible opportunity and a space in the news landscape, in the nonprofit news landscape specifically, for more in-depth video journalism. There are a lot of nonprofit newsrooms out there now. There are a lot more than there were just a few years ago. And they're doing, many of them, most of them are doing incredible original journalism, often investigative journalism, but not many nonprofit newsrooms are producing their own video journalism. And so we saw this opportunity given that, and also given the fact that a lot of major players in the documentary journalism or in-depth video journalism space had really dropped out of that space over the past few years. We saw Vice News, which had really dominated this format for many years and had dominated the award circuit certainly for many years. They're still around, but they're sort of a shell of their former self. Other companies have stepped back from that area, from that corner of the industry. And so we assembled a team of people, many of whom we had worked with either on staff at Scripps or through the freelance network that we were engaging, people from Scripps, but also from Vice, from PBS, from Al Jazeera, coming together and continuing this tradition of documentary journalism, in-depth video work into the nonprofit news space. And we did want to do that quickly because we felt like there is this incredible network out there and we want to keep them engaged. We want to harness that energy and we want to broadcast our entrance, into this gap, into this vacuum for this style of work. And so we don't want to we never want to come across as imitating. There are brands like Vice that really made a name for themselves in this space, and we don't want to just be, oh, it's Vice, but nonprofit news. But there is, an audience out there that really responded to that style of work and to the style of work that we did with In Real Life. And so we wanted to quickly convey to that network in the industry and also that audience network that, hey, there's a new outlet that does this style of reporting, that puts reporters on the ground, that goes to the heart of the story, that tells stories and that covers important topics but does it in a cinematic and engaging and really dynamic way. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And happy to get into the weeds of how we've sort of built the infrastructure and that side of starting a nonprofit. But from a very big picture view, a mission driven view, that's what was driving us and still is.
That's great. And, I mentioned this to you before we started recording, and I'll say it here on the record that, I want to truly acknowledge the tremendous work that you and your team are doing right off the bat. Just the pieces you've rolled
Thanks,
out since your inception have been fantastic. Your latest, spotlighting trans soldiers in the Army and their fear that in the coming weeks they will be forced out of the Army. Quite a moving and, about a 12-minute piece in that time. Very strong, very moving. Your team also recently accepted a national Emmy for a documentary called A Hidden War. So, there is a whole separate episode that we could do diving into the work that you are doing. And I want to acknowledge the just superb quality of that. That said, the purpose of this episode, as is the purpose of most of the episodes of this podcast, is somewhat different, right? We focus on how nonprofits tell their stories, and specifically the way that they try to separate themselves and distinguish themselves in a very, very crowded nonprofit market. Zach, I've been fascinated these last few months, which are your first few months as an organization, by how you've chosen to tell Evident Media's story. What do you remember about those first conversations where, you knew the kinds of stories that you wanted to tell, you knew the style, as you mentioned, that cinematic documentary style storytelling that you wanted to do, but then you had to figure out, okay, here's who we are, and here's how we're going to convey to the world who we are.
Yeah. So I was fortunate to start this organization with a co-founder. So Kevin Clancy, who you and I both worked with at Scripps, he and I founded this organization. And yeah, this was an early topic of conversation, is how we distinguish ourselves, how we tell our stories. And it did go through some iterations, and really we continue to refine it and add some pieces and maybe chip away at other pieces of the message that we're putting out there. At its core, the message has been and continues to be, we're producing in-depth video journalism, we're producing documentary journalism, we're connecting audiences on these platforms where video is so dominant with original journalism. But almost everything around that has continued to shift. I think one big guiding light for us has just been transparency. I mean, transparency is so huge to the journalistic process, or it should be. It's huge to it's a big part of being a nonprofit, right? Because you're putting paperwork out there every year that lets anybody and everybody sort of go under the hood of your organization. And so we went into this with this mindset of radical transparency. And that meant being very real about where we're starting from, which is not a place of having the backing of some, incredibly wealthy benefactor. Like, we're not starting this with a multi-million-dollar founding gift. We're starting it with a great team and a library of content, some of which we were able to bring over from Scripps. But the the focus for us is transparency, is being very straight up with our audience about the support that we need and able to in order to do what we're able to do. And the fact that we're mission driven and we're supported by the public, and sort of embracing that, not sort of running away from, not trying to hide the fact that we don't have the resources of the big networks that we're up against when we're nominated for an Emmy. We don't have anywhere near the resources that our competitors in this space have, even in the nonprofit side of it. And so we've just tried to be very upfront with that and saying, look, we're grassroots funded, we're supported by the public, we're supported by, a network of people, of individuals. And of course, we're pursuing the foundation support, and we want to be able to ramp up and grow. But that's the place that we're starting from. And so in thinking about how we told our origin story, that honesty, that transparency, that realness with the audience has been very central to the whole message.
Yeah, and you touched on something that I think is important, which is the idea that even though you are journalists and there is a transparency and at least a a reach towards objectivity or an acknowledgement of biases, right? And figuring out how to try to tell a story that is honest and thorough. There's also the fact that you're asking people for their money, right? You're asking for financial support. And particularly with video, something most people are used to just getting for free, either with their cable bill, which they're paying for, but when they're watching video, it feels free. Or, maybe they have to sit through a 30-second pre-roll ad on YouTube, but they're not paying money for it, right? So I think back to my career as a journalist and pitching people, uh, if I could interview them or do stories about them. That was one process. But now running a business where I do video storytelling, where the pitch also includes a budget and a cost to that work, that's a very different sort of pitch. I'm curious for you, when you fundraise, first of all, who is your audience for that? Who is your fundraising audience? Is it a broad, kind of the audience who you reach with your work? You're fundraising for them, or are you trying to find more donors who can maybe provide a higher level donation or backing to what you're doing?
Well, I should mention first off that, accessibility and making content freely available, that is central to what we're doing. So we've tried to we've been really clear with our supporters that they're helping us keep the content accessible, freely accessible for anyone. And so that's part of the message is uh, where you're chipping in, that allows us to present high quality visual journalism uh, that's not hidden behind a paywall. And I do think that's one of the biggest, that's a whole separate podcast, but I think that's one of the biggest problems that our society, that our, news media industry faces, is that a lot of the highest quality content is behind paywalls, and a lot of the um, content of questionable veracity is out there and freely available to people. But yeah, that's a separate subject. So um, to more directly answer your question as to like who we're reaching out to, who our target is, we started with the networks that we have. We started with people across the industry who recognize what's happening with documentary journalism, which is that so much of it has continued to trend towards celebrity. And when I say documentary, I guess I'm really talking about like all nonfiction. The nonfiction space, the documentary space, a lot of it these days is really revolving around celebrity and crime. And a lot of really talented people produce celebrity driven or crime focused documentary work. I've been part of that as well. So I'm not knocking it. It's valuable and there's a huge audience appetite for it. But if we want to continue to have documentary journalism that covers current events, that covers news, that covers issues that are important to the public, uh, we have to build more infrastructure to support that. And so that's a message we put out to an industry network who can see this happening. That's something we've tried to explain through short form videos, through videos that interweave beautiful cinematic footage and dynamic animation and a personal appeal that often I'm making. We try to explain that through all those tools to a broader audience on social media. And when we do broaden that net that we're casting, like when we do broaden the the message that we're sending out there, we're doing it with all the tools that we have in our tool belt for video journalism on social media platforms. And so we're taking all the lessons that we've learned at past outlets. We're looking at, how independent creators are reaching people and building personal brands on platforms like YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. And we're really focusing on, thumbnails and headlines and intros, like the first 5 seconds of the video. Does it grab somebody's attention? These are all really important ways to reach people through these social platforms, through video on these social platforms. And all of that is just woven into the fundraising strategy, to the strategy that we have in reaching people beyond just our personal networks.
He is Zach Toombs. I am Matt Pearl. This is .org, the podcast about how nonprofits tell their stories. Let me take just a minute here to tell you about how I tell stories. I was a journalist for many years. I traveled the world, covered the Olympics 3 times, and won national awards for video journalism, mostly for stories about the underreported issues facing our communities and the people and organizations offering solutions. Now I get to work directly with those people and organizations. At Pearl Impact Media, I provide meaningful, memorable, affordable video storytelling for nonprofits and purpose-driven businesses. Maybe you want to raise funds, maybe you want to raise awareness, maybe you want to showcase your services in ways only video can do. I'm based in Atlanta, but work with clients across the country, and I would love to work with you. Head to my website at pearlimpactmedia.com to schedule a free consultation. Back with Zach Toombs. Zach, you really led into where I wanted to go next with this, which is the fact that, so often I work with clients who have no experience with video. They have no experience with storytelling, or at least limited experience. And sometimes they even have limited experience with overall marketing, right? You and your team come in with years of experience and accolades in video journalism and the way that you reach people and connect with audiences, and not just through your documentary level journalism that you produce, but also through social media and the various platforms that you mentioned. So you and your team already started with an advantage there with having the tools already. How do you decide which of those tools to use, or maybe what have you found has worked best in terms of telling your own story and really getting out the message of not just what you're doing, but why you're different than CBS News or ABC News or Vice or any of the other media agencies that are out there?
Well, the distinguishing factor for us is that we're, from all those other outlets that you mentioned, is that we're driven by a pure journalistic mission and a nonprofit mission, and not by commercial interests. And a lot of great journalism is done by all those companies you mentioned and by others who ultimately are driven by commercial interests and obligations to a board or advertisers. So, that model works too, but what we offer is different, and it's something that is totally removed from profit incentives. And I think that the public deserves an option for original journalism that is not tied to profit incentives and commercial interests. So that's part of the reason we're doing what we're doing, and that's a big distinguishing factor. So we take a similar approach in video production, whether it's producing an original project like the coverage that we've done with Cal Matters, the biggest nonprofit newsroom in California. We've continued to partner with around immigration coverage. That's coverage of an issue, obviously. We take the same approach toward that as we do with the messaging that we're putting out about who we are, what we're doing, how we're raising money, in that we're deploying the same kind of tools, right? The cinematic footage, the dynamic animation, the focus on thumbnails and headlines, and the first 5 seconds of the video, and making sure that has a hook to it and is really appealing. So we take the same mindset into both of those very different types of content. And I think that's really the only way to reach people on those social platforms. And we're doing work that we've co-distributed with PBS NewsHour. We've distributed work through more traditional channels. So it's not to say that we're wholly focused on the social media, social video product, but it is a big piece of what we're doing. And one thing that we've realized, in terms of a lesson we've learned, is that there is really just as much value in the short form video as there is in the sort of central pillar documentary projects that we're producing. I think I've mentioned our message we've continued to refine it. One way we've continued to refine our message and our mission is to make clear that we're not just about the one big documentary project that we're releasing every few weeks or every month. We also have work that we're releasing, on a daily or weekly basis that is driven from, video podcast conversations like this, that is pulled from just quick updates that we can get out to follow up on reporting that we've done already, maybe a collaboration with an independent journalist around a topic that they have expertise in. All of those things, not only are they journalistically valuable, but often those get seen more than a lot of the bigger projects that we're
Mm.
spending like weeks and months and a lot more resources on. So I think my thinking has evolved just because in my last role I was so focused on the big swings, and I didn't really, it wasn't my responsibility to focus on all the little things that could go out on a more daily basis. And so I think for myself and for the team around Evident, we've realized and we've just had to wrap our heads around the unique value that the short form video can provide separate from the big swing documentary projects.
So quite a few lessons that I think are in that response, Zach, that if I'm a smaller nonprofit that I'm taking away, a smaller nonprofit is not going to have the cinema level cameras, right? They're not going to probably have an in-house animator that can do those kinds of great animations. But what they can do when it comes to social media, figure out a way to post consistently within your limits and within your means, right? Think about
Yep.
thumbnails and headlines to what you're posting. I think that's a lesson I'm taking away from what you said there. Really think consciously about that. Think about the story that you're telling through that content is probably the overarching lesson there. Not just posting content independently, but kind of it should all string together to form a larger story about who you are and what you're doing. And then a thing that I said that I hope registers, and which I imagine registers with a lot of nonprofits who aren't in the media space, but the idea of leveraging your partnerships. And you mentioned doing work with Cal
Yep.
Matters and PBS NewsHour. I would imagine, especially as you're building up your own infrastructure, being able to lean on those partners and work to lift each other up, that goes a long way because you're not just reaching your own audience, but they're reaching your audience and you're reaching theirs.
I'm so glad that you honed in on that. It's honestly, I'm surprised it's not something that I've already talked about with more detail because the partnerships have been so central to everything that Evident is doing in our early months, and we certainly wouldn't have um, gotten the visibility that we've gotten so far without these partnerships. And I should mention Bellingcat as well because
Yep.
they've been a really incredible partner to us from day one. And the first partner piece that we released was with them, and we continue to work with them, each of us bringing our own unique expertise. For them it's the open source investigative and research powers that they have, and for us it's the visual journalism and the video production. And we're just continuing to find new ways to complement each other's strengths. uh, and the same could be said, I think, for Cal Matters. The PBS partnership is more of a distribution partnership, so it's a little bit different, but a really valuable way to benefit both organizations because they are looking for more stories like the stories that we're producing, and we, really benefit from obviously having the visibility of their platform. And I think that is sort of this slingshot growth method that is worth consideration for any new organization or new nonprofit, because when you partner with, especially in a media space where the whole goal is to like get your work seen, um, but really for any organization that's building an audience or building a community, when you work with a partner who's been around a little bit longer than you and you have something uniquely valuable to offer them, they're going to benefit from that partnership through what you bring to the table. And you're going to benefit because you're getting in front of their audience, and some of their audience may become your audience or your community. And for us, that has really had beautiful results. And if I could, I'd have a partner on every project that we produce.
It's great. Last thing I wanted to just ask you about here, Zach, it strikes me that, when I talk with nonprofits who cover really any issue and any part of the country, but who are working on different levels, there are nonprofits who provide a, we'll say, a low cost barrier to entry service to a wide variety of people. And then there are nonprofits who, you know, the services they provide are higher cost, much higher cost in some cases, and they can support fewer people. The the parallel to what you're doing there is, I remember last year, right around this time, I attended the annual conference for the Institute of Nonprofit News. And one of the big questions I was asking folks as I was contemplating my own career journey was, you know, there's so many nonprofit news outlets who I've always admired, who I think do great work, but very few of them do video. Why is that? And it was very clear that financially, video is prohibitive for the vast majority of nonprofits in the news world right now. Video is one of those higher cost to entry barrier products, and you're putting out far fewer pieces a year than a written outlet, right? So you kind of go in with a certain, not to say that it makes things more challenging. I would imagine, though, that it changes your approach when you're trying to tell your own story because you have fewer cracks at it, right? You just have fewer chances to kind of put the word out about who you are with your own content. And I'm curious as to how you've navigated that. You mentioned trying to, juice every last bit out of these longer projects through the short form platforms and through social media. But I'm curious as to how that has just changed your approach to both fundraising, to getting people to buy into what you're doing when they know that, hey, Evident Media is not a daily publication. It is a periodic publication, but the work, the individual pieces are going to be worth it.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've heard that refrain often over the past several months that video is too expensive. I don't completely agree, but I guess I'll first say, before I go into more detail on that, I'll first say that it definitely does not make sense for every newsroom or nonprofit newsroom to have an in-house video team or to try to do like long form or mid form video in-house. And that's where an organization like Evident can come in as a partner, because maybe there's just one project every once in a while that would really benefit from some kind of video component, so that you have a video that you can build events around, that you can use as sort of a top of the funnel to get more people to the more in-depth text reporting that you're doing. You may not need that continually. You may not need that out of a staff team, but I do think it's something that every news organization should consider doing every once in a while, to have a video component around major projects that they're doing, at least. Okay, to the topic of how expensive video is, I do obviously there are some aspects of video production that are uniquely challenging, that maybe require different processes or different types of equipment. I don't think it has to be as expensive as people think it is. And I also think you can get a lot more out of it than people think you can, because consider a 20-minute documentary project. I'll just use an example, of this piece that we did with Cal Matters. That was a 16-minute documentary. We've pulled at least a dozen pieces of short form content, whether it's, video clips that were drawn from that, or sort of social cards, static images with a quote or something like that. Not to mention the dozens and dozens of high quality, high resolution images you can pull from the footage that you gathered, that can then be used across articles on text platforms, in perpetuity, whenever that issue is covered in the future. So people I think they think it's expensive because they're thinking about the big number that maybe a 20-minute piece is going to cost. But it's not really just about that 20-minute piece. It's all the short form content that you can get out of that. One of those posts is probably going to pop and go semi-viral, at least, and is going to end up getting more views than everything else combined. So even, a 1-minute clip could end up being more valuable in terms of social reach and audience reach than everything else that you've published. So I think people have to think about these things creatively. They have to think about the benefits of video in a comprehensive way, that, in keeping in mind everything that you can pull out of a project, whether it's video or data visualization, graphics, still images, social cards. There are just so many ways to slice up a video project, even just interviews that you're collecting on audio platforms. I mean, we've been developing podcast series just based on documentaries that we've put together, there's so much potential when you go out with a camera and even a small team, a crew of like 2 people that know how to capture really high quality material. There's a lot you can do with that.
That's great. It's I will say it's not apples to apples, but in my work when I started doing impact videos for nonprofits, I really tried to my initial sales pitch to nonprofits was always trying to find those individual uses, right? Like you could show this at an event or you could show this on your website. And what I have found with the clients that I've worked with who really stay on top of it is they find so many ways to use that one video or to branch it out into smaller clips, just like you're talking about from a news standpoint, but they're doing it in e-appeals and emails and fundraising blasts. And they just find so many different ways to make the most out of something, which again seems expensive off the bat, but then you think of the return on that investment. And there is just so much potential there in so many ways that you can utilize it. Video being such a versatile form of content, because as you said, you get video, but you also get the audio out of it. You also get stills out of it. You can just make so much hay with that. So I think that's a really, really great point. Zach, I have greatly enjoyed this conversation. Before we let you go, I'm going to ask you that famous last question all reporters love to ask. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate this space that you've created for folks in the nonprofit landscape to talk about what they do, and much respect for what you're building with Pearl Impact Media. It's great to see.
That is Zach Toombs, founder and executive director of Evident Media. You can find them at evidentmedia.org. Zach, thanks so much for your time, and that will do it for episode 6 of .org. If you found this helpful and want others to hear it too, a great rating or review wherever you get your podcasts goes a long way. Please take the time if you can. And check out my work at Pearl Impact Media. Video storytelling can be so beneficial for so many organizations. I would love to work with yours. Book a free consultation now at pearlimpactmedia.com. All right, friends, I am Matt Pearl. Thank you for listening to .org. See you next time.